Rev up your engines!
Robert Jones says, have you seen this one for Ford Cleveland? Ford 2021 Bronco V6 engines are failing. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration gets involved. I've seen it, and what's happening, it seems that realize they're all trying to save money building vehicles. So, rather than research and design all the parts themselves, they farm it out to other companies. So, what's Ford doing with these engines is they're farming out the valves for the engines that open and close, let the air in and out as the engine fires. Hard steel, really, have to be well made. They're buying them from a company, I believe it's in Ohio, and they didn't build them right, they didn't heat treat them right, and the valves are snapping off and breaking, destroying the engines, right? Of course, Ford's blaming it on the people that supplied them the bad valves, right? You know who I blame it on? Ford. You're the ones who hired those people to build the parts for your car. And a very crucial part of valve. Ford used to build all their own valves, all their own engine parts, right? They had their own quality control. Now, well, that costs too much. Now we'll just buy them from somebody else. And then when it screws up, you know who's got egg on your face? You do, Ford, not the guys that are selling. You're buying it from these guys. It's your fault for using a company that's doing a crappy job. And I warn people about buying something that's new. You get these new Broncos, who knows what's going to happen? And that's what's happening. The engines are exploding. Some of them are exploding with as little as 1,600 miles on them. Uncalled for? Well, because they're farming their stuff out to another company because they're too cheap to do the research and design to build it themselves. And then when something goes wrong at the other company, it makes them look like fools. I'm sure Henry Ford is rolling over in his grave on that one. Well, finally, Consumer Reports agrees with me. This year, Consumer Reports advised against buying any of the Nissan Rogues. They don't recommend any of them. I've been saying it for years. When Nissan was Datsun decades ago, they made pretty good vehicles. Then in year 2000, Renault bought them out. That was the beginning of the real decline of Nissan. They've been going downhill ever since with quality. Well, finally, Consumer Reports agrees with me and they don't advise you to buy one. Who knows what's going on? Maybe Nissan is not paying them anymore to say how great their vehicles are. I have no idea what goes on in those things. Consumer things, they base it on the nuttiest things. Ages ago, my father was telling me he sold Remington typewriters, big heavy typewriters, right? And a Consumer Reports then gave them a horrible rating and gave a foreign-made cheap typewriter better rating. So he called them up and said, how come you're rating Remington typewriters as bad typewriters? And they said, well, because when we get the typewriter and we drop it 3 feet on a concrete, it doesn't work that good. And the cheaper one does, so we don't rate them that good. What a rating system. Who the heck gets a nice machine and drops it on a concrete? It's a typewriter. You type on a desk, right? You're not dropping them on concrete. That was their stupid test. A lot of times their stuff is just total nonsense. But this time I finally agree with them. They say not to buy Nissan. I've been telling people that for years. They're finally catching up with me, right? And realizing, gee, maybe these things aren't made all that well, you know? Well, I'm always warning people not to buy Kias. Well, 260,000 plus of Optimus sedans are being recalled because if the airbags deploy, the metal parts in the ceiling can come apart and smash into you, right? So you think, okay, sounds pretty simple. Here is Kia's solution, and I'm not making this up. Dealers will put industrial grade tape over the plates to help secure them. This is their fix. They'll put tape over them. They'll tape them back on. I mean, you want to talk about a half-assed way of fixing a problem. Well, these plates might come off when the airbags go off and smash into you, so we'll put some tape to hold them on. How long is tape going to last, you know? We're talking about insanity here. It's taped to the roof, right? Okay, taping to the roof. What does the roof get in the sun? Hot. How long is this tape going to last, right? Talk about a half-assed way to make a recall fix. Oh, we'll put some tape on it. I mean, it's unbelievable because they don't want to have to be where they rebuild them. Oh, we'll just stick some tape on it. That is their solution. And how the government allows that to be a solution to a dangerous thing. Well, we'll just tape them back on. It's beyond me. I mean, it's gotten to a point of almost comedic relief. They'll hold it for a while. That reminds me when I was a kid. My father had a GM, a V8, and the motor mounts were breaking. And in the old days, the vehicles actually hung from the motor mounts. Today, they sit on top of them. But in those days, the motor mounts held them up. And if the motor mounts broke, the engine could fall down, hit the ground, right? GM's solution to these bad motor mounts that they had to do a recall on and fix, in quotation mark 3, was they just got a little chain. They put a chain around each of the 2 motor mounts. So if it fell and they broke, it wouldn't hit the ground. Now, of course, That didn't fix anything, right? It would still be broken, but it wouldn't hit the ground and be dangerous. That was their half-ass fix back in the day. But I think I'd rather have a chain than a piece of tape. At least they didn't say, well, we'll duct tape the motor mounts back on. Mr. Machiavelli says, what alternatives are there to RAV4 and CRV? I'm broke and can't afford a RAV4 or CRV. What other SUVs can I consider looking at? Well, one, you said you're broke. If I were you, forget SUVs. Get a sedan. The prices of sedans are much lower than the prices of SUVs. You want the most popular thing out there. And guess what the most popular sold SUVs in the United States are? First is the RAV4. They're number one. Number two is CRV. Last year, they sold the most RAV4s and second most in the United States with the CRVs. You're looking at the most popular vehicles. They're going to cost a lot of money. They're popular for a reason. They get decent gas mileage for an SUV. They can last a really long time being Japanese cars. If you're considering other SUVs, you're going to find the quality drops like a stone. I would never advise anybody to buy a Nissan SUV. They're junk. They fall apart. Consumer Reports recently said, do not buy Nissan Rogues. They're not any good. They don't even recommend buying them, right? You get into the American SUVs, the quality control problems are all over the place. They're still expensive, but they're not built all that well. And you want to talk about the German SUVs, well, you're broke. Forget buying a German SUV. My advice is to get about a nice sedan. You can get them a lot cheaper. They're not as popular. Buy what's not popular and what's well made. That's what I say. You look at Toyota, Honda sedans, you're going to find they're a lot cheaper than their SUVs, and they're just as well made. It says, my Toyota 2000 is hard to start when it's hot. It's a Yaris. When the engine's cold, it starts right up. When it's hot, it requires a lot more cranking. What could be the problem? When an engine is ice cold, it needs extra fuel to start the car. When you crank the engine over, the computer pulses extra amounts of gasoline on a cold engine to start it up. It needs extra fuel. Once the engine is warmed up, it runs much leaner. It needs more air and less fuel to run correctly. You get a car like that, starts fine cold, but then after you drive a while, shut it off, say you have a sandwich and come back and it's hard to start. That usually means the engine is flooding itself out, because a hot engine, if it gets the extra fuel, is going to be harder to start because it's flooded out. Commonly on those, the most common for a Toyota is the fuel injectors are just old and they are leaking fuel when you shut the engine off. What you would do is first have a mechanic pressure clean your injectors. It could be they're dirty and carbon is holding them pintles open, and then they leak gas and they flood out. Simple. If not that, it could be that they're going to need replacing, and then you'd have to have the fuel injectors replaced. Now, say you're cheap, you don't replace all 4 injectors. What you could do is drive it till it's hot. Try to start it. If it doesn't start after a couple starts, stop right there. Pull out all the spark plugs. And if you see 3 of the spark plugs are fine, but one of them is wet, that is the cylinder that you could replace just that fuel injector, because it could be just that that one has gone bad. You could do that if you want to try to save money, because the wet one would be the one with the bad injector. Cars 5789 says, do electric batteries and hybrid and fully electric vehicles expire? Is there anything that tells you if the battery is good or not if I'm buying a used one? Well, yes is the answer to both questions. All batteries wear out over time. I got lithium-ion batteries in the cameras, my Panasonic camera I film all these videos with, right? And generally after, with those, couple years, 2.5 years, they go squirrely, and when you put them in the camera will say there's 50% charge, and then 2 minutes later the camera goes dead. Then you just throw the batteries away and you buy new ones, right? But then again, these batteries are only like $40 a piece. Battery in a fully electric car can be $15,000, and a hybrid can be $8,000 or $10,000. They're expensive, right? They do wear out over time. That's just how batteries are. If you're going to buy a used hybrid or electric vehicle, you got to get a guy like me, and you pay him. We have special machines that we plug into the car. Takes about 30 minutes, and it does a whole analysis of the battery system, and it will tell you exactly what's left. It'll say it's got 100% of its lifespan left, or it'll say it's got 50% or 20%. It will give you a very accurate reading. Then you decide, hey, this battery's almost worn out. If it's a fully electric car, it's going to cost you, say, 15 grand to replace that battery. You might say, I'm not going to buy this car. It's not worth it. And the other thing is, if you do have one or you're going to buy one, you say, well, I'll put in a rebuilt battery in one of these cars. I don't advise that, because when they rebuild them, they get a machine like I have and they say, okay, there's 186 cells, 80 of them are bad. Well, then they replace those 80. But then there's 110 that still are the old cells that are still old, and they'll wear out, and they may only last a year or two before that craps out. Realize each one of these giant batteries is made out of hundreds of little cells. And so, when they replace the ones that are bad, they still got old ones. Say it's a 10-year-old battery, and they rebuilt it. If 100-something of those cells are still the original ones, they're 10 years old, and they're going to go bad. So I don't advise buying these rebuilt ones. It's a bunch of nonsense. They don't last as long as the new ones. So there's a real hassle in electric and hybrid cars as they age that a lot of people really don't want to get involved in buying used cars that way. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.